What's up, everyone? Coach Lucas here with Coach Leo. Today, we're going to talk about injuries, and perhaps we can start with rehab and some measures players can take um, during the rehab process to speed up recovery. I think one of the things that kind of prompted this video is a recent couple players that have had injuries, Leo, that we've been working with, and I think where we can start is perhaps what I'd like to talk about here is the types of injuries that perhaps soccer players may go through, and then talk about some things that parents and players may not get from physical therapy or from PT, and just some things to keep in mind as they go through the rehab process. And then if we have time, maybe we can get into injury prevention, but I kind of sense that there's enough to handle here just on the rehab side. So first and foremost, injuries, types of injuries. What are you seeing on your end?
Most common injury was probably a ankle sprain, is what I see in soccer anyway. And then the big injury that is most common is the ACL. And then we have MCL, PCL, we have some hip impingements. I see a lot of groin issues, a lot of groin pulls, a lot of groin pain when people are running. And then random things that are happening just from falls, more like wrist, elbow, stuff like that. The most common is
are you seeing lower back?
lower back is coming up now. It's starting to be honest, in the last few years, I've been seeing that a little more than before. And we're seeing more fractures on like the spinous and the transverse process of the vertebrae. So, you got your big vertebrae bone there, and then you have little things that kind of come off it and one off the back. So we're starting to see fractures on some of those little bones, which is really interesting because I hadn't seen that as much in the past as I'm starting to see. We've had like two of those just in the last year that I documented. One of them was one of our players. And that really interesting because that particular player, when I had spoken to him before the injury, was actually training with what he said was an NFL, ex-NFL pro. And I asked him about some of the stuff they were doing. And I mean, I can go off a whole tangent on that, but like just because he was a professional athlete does not mean he knows what to do for a youth athlete, especially in their developmental stages. Maybe he knows how to work with elite athletes really well that have already done all the foundational work. So this kid that I assessed, I biomechanically didn't think he should be squatting. I asked him if he was, and he was two-legged squatting, which is a bilateral squat. And he ended up fracturing one of the spinous processes in his vertebrae. And he had a 6-month rehab after that, which was a really long rehab to do. Now, the rehab setting itself. So typically, now this isn't all the time, but typically this is what happens. You get a physical therapist dealing with your injury. They're going to write up a little program for it. They are monitored by insurance because insurance is who is going to pay the bill every single session, right? And the bill is usually pretty expensive. So insurance has what they deemed okay for that type of injury. Now, that doesn't mean the physical therapist thought that necessarily is the best plan for the outcome they're looking for. What they decided was, okay, I'm going to create the best plan I can under the liability guidelines that insurance has set for me. So is that necessarily the best thing for the athlete? We don't really know because I don't see all of what insurance deemed necessary for that athlete.
Well, it's certainly not optimized for the athlete. It's optimized for a different purpose, and that's a misalignment.
The liability purpose as opposed to what's the best outcome for our athlete purpose. So what we do a lot in the strength training world, in the medical world, in the health world is called the minimal effective dose, meaning what's the littlest thing I can give somebody to get them to improve, right? So if you take a fish oil, for instance, like a supplement, what they'll do for liability issues is show you the minimal effective dose that actually made an improvement in your body. That doesn't actually mean it's the optimal dose for you. That really is individualized. And I couldn't tell you, Coach Lucas, specifically how much fish oil to take unless I knew you well and assessed you well, assessed your different biomechanical markers so that I can give you more of an optimal dose of what you should be taking. The same thing is happening in physical therapy. We're talking about what's the least effective dose to get you just out our door and our injury is gone now. That doesn't mean we actually fixed what might have happened to cause the injury in the first place, right? And then we're also going off of a lot of information that is somewhat outdated. You know, the people that are best in the field are still in the field. They're not teaching at universities, right? So my mentor told me universities are typically 2 to 3 Olympic cycles, which in one Olympic cycle is 4 years behind what's actually happening in the field. So if we're going to only do what we're learning in school, which a lot of therapists after get their diploma, they're done, they know everything, they don't need to learn more, then we could be 8 to 12 years behind what's actually the most effective plan or outcome that we're trying to get to achieve with that athlete. So knowing that tells me that I have to be the one to do way more, because if my athlete had an injury, they're with their therapist, I usually get the plan and I see that it's very limited. Now, going back to what I was talking about before, that therapist will get the plan, then they have assistants. They're not actual physical therapists, they're PAs or PT assistants, and they might be 2 or 3 of them working with 6 different people at the same time. So when my wife was going to physical therapy at a very nice hospital, it's Rush in Chicago City, they're supposed to have an amazing orthopedics center. So I was going with her on all of her appointments, and there was times where the assistant would come up, get a 3 little timer, she's doing her thing, and I'm like, what happens if you're doing it wrong? She's like, well, they'll come back around. I was like, so you could be doing it wrong for 3 full minutes and then they'll come and see what you're doing at the end of your timer? I'm like, that doesn't seem right. I'm like, I'm going to test this, okay? Because what happens right here and now if you start messing up? So I knocked the timer off the table. Timer went off. She stopped doing the exercise. The assistant came up. Well, I just stopped doing the exercise. Well, the timer went off. Well, the timer went off? Yeah. Okay, that's no problem. We're just going to restart it. And I was like, so is she doing an extra set now? Or is she repeating the set she did before? And is she doing the exercise right in the first place? So the next time we went to the therapy, they asked her to not bring me anymore because they didn't like that I was challenging what they were doing. I wanted to make sure that they were doing the best to actually get her to where she needed to go. And I don't believe that they were. Now, other therapy settings, they have more one-on-one direct therapy. That I like better because then at least you're getting individualized attention. If you know, your brain sometimes wanders. You're doing something that's very monotonous movement to fix your wrist for 3 straight minutes. You might start going somewhere else in your head. That's where the therapist comes in to say, hey, you need to focus. You need to feel what you're supposed to feel and focus on what you're actually doing to get a better outcome. So I like one-on-one physical therapy settings better, but that typically isn't happening, especially with your large chain therapy offices. I'm not going to name names, but you guys have probably heard of them. I mean, there was one client I had who won an award for 300 sessions with her PT. I thought that was crazy. They gave her an award for that. I thought there should be an award for only 4 PT sessions with your PT. Wow, you did 4 sessions and you got back to where you needed to be. That's amazing. You took 300 sessions and you're still not where you need to be. That shouldn't be rewarded, in my opinion. Like a reward should be getting somewhere there faster. And that's kind of what leads me into the next segment of what can we do to optimize these outcomes.
That's exactly what I was going to say. Is like when we talk about speeding up recovery, whether it's the ankle sprain, the ACL, groin, what are some things that will help speed up the recovery process that you find to be most effective?
So first thing you got to do when you have a recent injury is you want to clear that inflammation out fast. You want your body to be done being inflamed so that you can go back into full range of motion movements without pain. Now, there's ways to accelerate that inflammatory response, the recovery from that. Now, I have quite a few, but my number one way that I've found recently is really voodoo flossing. So voodoo flossing, let's say I have because you guys can see it. Let's say I have a wrist injury here. Something hurts in my wrist. I fell on it weird and it's inflamed, right? So it hurts a little bit, but I can move it around. So a voodoo floss is a wrap It's a round wrap, and it's made out of like latex with kind of a little bit of chalky texture on it. And that's so it can kind of stick to you pretty well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start overlapping the wrap. I'm going to pin it and I'm going to start overlapping it over itself. Now, if it's painful to do it right on the place that I got injury, that's perfectly fine. I could actually do it below, and it's still going to affect where the injury is, which is beautiful. So when I do the wrap in a quick tutorial, I do a 50% overlap. That means 50% of the section shows each time I go around. And I'm going up towards the heart always because I want to create better circulation towards the heart so I can pump it, get through it all my filtration systems, get the blood back out into my arm. That's nice, clean blood that got rid of all that cool metabolic waste. I'll do 50% tension, meaning if I pulled it really hard, that's 100% tension. I back off, that's 50% tension. So 50% overlap, 50% tension. I'll wrap, usually an area from your thumb to the pinky, somewhere in the 4 to 6 inch range. And then I'll tie it back into itself. Now, if I can do active movements, then I'm going to go through range of motion, and I'm going to do usually 20 reps of something. What that will do, all the muscles are really stacked on top of each other at that point. They're compressed onto each other. I should still have some circulation, so I want to feel my fingertips. It's not numb. It's not getting tingly, right? But it is constricted, so I am stopping some circulation coming into my wrist. So now these muscles that are stacked on each other and they're really, really pressed on each other, they're going to be forced to slide and glide on top of each other. Now, what that's going to do is break up a lot of different tissues that got stuck to it, different metabolic waste products, different things that happened from the injury itself that might still be there. And now within 5 minutes, I might start getting tingly. I'm going to unwrap that thing really fast. And now blood is going to flush that whole area. And it's going to clear a lot of the metabolic waste products that I had in there from the injury, right? The blood in there is going to also increase my range of motion. It's going to feel better. Now I can do more passive range of motion. Now, the key to really clearing this stuff out is frequency. And same thing with the exercises. As soon as the inflammation is cleared, you want to bring your frequency up quickly. So if you're only doing 2 PT sessions a week and all you're doing is the little bit of homework they gave you, which was remember the what did I call it? The least effective dose. That's going to be literally the minimum you could have done to help yourself from that injury. I don't know about you guys, but I'm not about doing minimums. I'm about doing things at an optimal level. So I want to do everything that I can, because I want to get back to playing as fast as I possibly can. So the voodoo flossing, you could do that 10 to 12 times a day. I had an athlete who was going to go for a professional tryout in a different country. 2 weeks before that tryout, he rolled his ankle and he couldn't run without pain. I had taught him that method. That's the other cool thing about this is going to be something you can take home and utilize for anything. It doesn't have to be a serious injury to still utilize this to recover faster. So 1 week after using that, he was doing it like 10 times a day. He was running without pain. 2 weeks later, he went to the tryout. He's got the spot. So now he's going to be going pro this summer, which is really, really cool. That wouldn't have happened without that single tool of voodoo flossing, which is amazing. You could do more than one wrap at once, but you always want to go towards the heart. When the lines are still there, then you want to leave it alone until the lines dissipate, because then your body's getting back to homeostasis, and then you want to redo the wrap. So you could do that with your ankle. You could do that with your knee. You could do it around your quad. You could do it just to increase mobility. But for the sake of the talk, we're talking about for recovering from injury. So that's what I would start with, to start clearing out a lot of that inflammation so that we can get back to going into bigger exercises. Now, from there, what needs to happen is giving nutrient supply. So you have to master your nutrition. You got to get rid of inflammatory foods in your body. So if you're eating something that's creating inflammation in your body's working to clear that inflammation and clear the inflammation in the injury itself. So I can't hammer that home enough. You have to eat really, really clean when you have an injury and when you're recovering from injury. I've never heard a physical therapist talk about that. Never. And maybe they do, and that's great if they do. It's just not something that I've personally heard. When I was going with my wife, they never once mentioned nutrition. And that there's other parts of nutrition that are going to aid that as well. You want to make sure you're taking your multivitamin every day, because you can't get the nutrients you need to out of just your normal diet. You should be taking omega-3 if you're not eating fish regularly, because that's literally, it creates the membrane of your cell. So if you need nutrients to come into your cell, you need a nice, good membrane of omega-3 coating the cell. So omegas I'm big on. Vitamin D is really crucial. I actually even like, if you have an injury, to get direct sunlight on that injury. So sunlight speeds up your mitochondria. The faster your mitochondria are spinning, the more they can produce ATP, your energy, the more they can produce collagen, which is literally what's going to rebuild the tissues from that injury site. And then protein needs to be high because you're rebuilding new tissues. So you have to have more protein than you'd be normally taking. Obviously, quality, clean proteins. I'm not going to get into what the best form of protein is on this, but you need essential amino acids in the protein. So animal-based proteins are most commonly found, all the essential amino acids. So vitamins should be taken. Food should be perfect. You should up your calories slightly. And then as soon as the inflammation is gone, you got to add frequency to whatever you're doing. Whatever movements they give you, you can do that more often. You know, if you had a knee injury, if it's a severe knee injury, they do a lot of straight leg raises. Do that every 2 to 3 hours. Patella mobilization first, so moving your kneecap around, getting it to mobilize, and then do that straight leg lift every few hours. There's nothing that's going to cause any problems from doing it more frequently.
Can you talk about bilateral versus, like, if it's a lower extremity injury, talk a little bit about that? Because it looks as though this topic may conflict with some of the things that PTs are prescribing, at least from what we've seen. So can you talk on that a little bit?
Absolutely. And I'll give you an example. We assessed an athlete when we were in Naples at a camp. I'm not going to mention his name, but he recently came off a knee injury. I think he tore either his meniscus or his MCL. So I was checking his mobility from one leg to the next, right? And asking him about what they were doing in his physical therapy while I'm checking it. And his mobility in his injured leg was actually better than the mobility of the non-injured leg. So I asked him, when they were doing all your mobility work, did they match it with the other leg? He's like, no. I was like, do you think that would be important? And he's like, well, I guess. And I was like, do you realize that you're more mobile in your injured leg than your non-injured leg? And he's like, well, now that you're showing me that, yeah. And I was like, did they have you bilaterally squatting, which, as I spoke about earlier, that's a 2-legged squat, right? And he's like, yeah, absolutely. They had me do it every single week. And I'm like, so one leg is more mobile than the other leg, and they have you squatting with both legs going down. Explain to me how you're going to balance out your legs that way. What created the injury in the first place, right? So he probably already had a mobility issue. There's probably an asymmetry, right? When we squat with asymmetries, we create bigger asymmetries. We don't fix asymmetries like that. We make the body strong that way. So there has to be certain things you do individual leg, balancing them out. They should be even before you ever go into a bilateral movement, and that's before we even talk about injuries. If someone's coming into my gym and they're an athlete, I don't care how long they've trained. If their legs are uneven, they're not going to squat with 2 legs.
For scope purposes, how long can it take to get to find balance?
Out an injury and with somebody that's already like pretty good, it'll still take probably 2 to 3 months. Still, and that's without having that injury happen in the first place. If you're a really good coach and you're really on it with the athlete, then you could probably that's talking about training 4 days a week, multiple times a day with doing mobility work. Then you could probably hammer it out in like 2 months. But typically you're looking more to that 3-month mark of balancing everything out, because the body's an ecosystem and we're going to load his spine, right? So we're loading up his spine and his legs are uneven. Tell me that the spine loading isn't going to be uneven too. Like, that's just a recipe for disaster for the future. And the foundation we're trying to build with this athlete, we're not building a foundation. We're building a house of cards. And one day, one of those cards is going to knock down the whole thing. But coaches all are about how much you squat, how much you deadlift, how much can you do a bench press with. Is that really serving your athlete, or is that serving you and the numbers you're trying to hit? You can talk about your athlete squats 300 or something, great job, but he can't get full depth. One leg works harder than the other, and you still got injured that year. Are you still proud of your 300-pound squat? No, I'm proud of the athlete that doesn't get injured.
Can you share? You talked about 2 things. One big important deal is inflammation management. The other thing that you mentioned was the role that mitochondria play in cell development and recovery. Can we talk a little bit about magnesium and red light therapy?
Yeah, so minerals are super important for your body. Obviously, magnesium affects, shoot, last I heard, it was something like 350 different chemical reactions in the body.
I think it's
So,
800.
okay, yeah, I was going to say, I think it's way up now from the more recent studies, which is insane. So when you have an injury, you're going to utilize more minerals than you would if you didn't. And let's say, what if that caused the injury in the first place? What if you were already depleted in that mineral in that specific area, and your muscle action just couldn't work the way that it's supposed to because it's depleted in minerals? Now, when we're recovering that injury, it's going to be crucial to get that mineral into that localized area. So I'm really big on magnesium gel. I really love magnesium gel because it's a salt, and salt helps absorb magnesium into the cells, into the actual cell walls themselves. Because where sodium goes, whatever is attached to it's going to go as well. That's why sodium is important for hydration in general. But yeah, magnesium gel is awesome. I like to use it localized. The cool thing is I even use it when it's non-injured, because it can increase mobility 10 to 15 degrees just by applying it. Now, with the caveat, if you have a scar there and it's fresh, you're pouring salt into a fresh wound. So be careful on that. So maybe let the wound
Like
heal really well.
when you say scar, you mean open wound, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Even if like the wound is like looks closed on top, and if it's still kind of fresh underneath, that's absorbing down into that. So this is a lot of information, but I shave my neck, and when I put magnesium gel on my neck, it burns like crazy. It's the only area that so I always tell people start with like a dime or a quarter size, just to try it on that area to make sure the reaction is going to be what you're looking for. You should feel it absorb. You should feel it kind of weird, but it shouldn't burn. And if it burns, just wipe it off with water. It's really simple, but you can utilize it on any joint, and it's fantastic. If you're having the groin issue, often that's something that I utilize often with athletes, is using the magnesium gel before they play or before they train to get the minerals in there. And they can do that multiple times a day. I also like arnica cream. Arnica is really good for like healing bruises fast, to help inflammation go down quick, and it's all natural. And then red light therapy is neat because it's very similar to the sunlight, and you can do more like specific targeted areas. And it also has infrared, so it's going to help the body heal much faster. So red light therapy, EMR Tech is the best company that I've found for red light therapy. You want to make sure there's no flicker. You won't see the flicker. Okay. So I've had other people say, there's no flicker in my red light. Like, you can't visibly see an infrared spectrum. Okay. So if there's flicker, you would never know without actually having a tester. So EMR Tech has been tested many, many times. They have zero flicker on all of the red lights. You can get a smaller one because you just need it to be able to shine on your localized area. I have a large one just because I want it to cover most of my body. But there's so many benefits to red light therapy in this scope, though. It's really good for just recovering injuries much faster, and you can do it multiple times a day. And that's what we're talking about, is improving the recovery time, of increasing how fast it can be before you get out and play, and not have to worry about re-injuring. I mean, most people that injure a knee within 1 to 2 years later, they injure the opposite, or they re-injure the same knee. Why is that? Because what we're doing isn't optimal, because we're doing the least effective dose. It's literally why this is happening. On top of nutrition is poor, and it's getting worse with our kids year after year. So they're already inflamed before they even go out on the field. So they already have inflammation happening in their body, and they're going to play. They create a little more, and then something can pop. So the prehab, to me, is a huge deal. But for scope of this talk, the rehab itself really could be elevated, and there's so many more things that people could be doing. But voodoo flossing, to me, is every PT should be teaching their athlete how to voodoo floss themselves. And you could do it so many times in a day, like you're going to increase. I've seen it where it's like twice as fast as what they predicted for the therapy schedule. And usually the therapist can't really explain it. It's just like, wow, yeah, you're doing really well. No, you're really ahead of schedule. I don't know what's happening. Like, no, we know what's happening, but it's okay if you don't know what's happening, because they don't want to accept that what they're doing isn't what they thought that they were going to be doing in life, and really, really helping athletes. They get caught into the system of insurance and the system of being under different therapy businesses that run it more like just how to make money instead of actually how to help you, how to help the athlete. And if you were to take that and just let that lead every decision you're making, then you're going to have the right outcomes. But if you're letting other factors go into your planning of physical therapy for your athlete, then it's not going to be ideal. It just won't.
Beautiful. Leo, as always, thanks so much for sharing your knowledge. I know we could talk about this stuff at length. Nonetheless, I appreciate you. And for those of you that are listening, if you'd like to hear more information about certain topics, if you have questions, reach out to Leo or myself, and we will be sure to help you. So Leo, thanks again, and take care, everyone.